Hello, I'm Dr. Tony Nolly here talking to you regarding our Essential 2 certification here with Maximize Living. Now, what I want to talk today really is about subluxation and the modern theories regarding subluxation and how they affect the spinal cord and nerve system. Now, what we're talking about mostly is the way they occur, right? The way they occur, and also how they can physically affect the nerve system. Now, subluxation by definition is going to be some type of interference, some type of neurological interference caused by the spine itself to the spinal nerves, spinal cord, nerve roots, and of course brainstem. This whole area can be affected when subluxation occurs. And that creates a neurological disturbance to the nerve system, which can affect the way the body functions and heals. That is what we're looking at when we look at the definition of subluxation. So how does that physically happen? How can the spine become subluxated if we have the ability to resist subluxation or to resist forces throughout our life? And it's true, the spine itself is actually an extremely resistant design. The way it's designed with the proper alignment being completely straight from the front, and these proper curves from the cervical spine to the thoracic spine to the lumbar spine actually create a structure that's very resistant to force, mostly compressional force. Your spine is extremely resistant to compressional force because that's what it deals with every single day. Forces like gravity and compression, things that we do when we exercise. Well, subluxation occurs when your spine experiences a force that it can no longer resist. So let me say that again. Your spine has to experience a force it can no longer resist. And that force can be physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional, it can be chemical. It can be some type of force that gets delivered into the spine that the structure, tissues, and ligaments of the spine can't resist it, so something has to give. And it can give along three different lines, three different ways. It can give by actually fracturing. For example, if your spine will experience such a force that, such a compressive force that the bones can't resist to the point where the bones will actually fracture, that is, the ultimate give. The thing actually breaks. Just like if you were to fall in such a way that I would hit my arm, the bones of my arm can no longer resist that force, but my bones of my arm have to give, and that give is a fracture. The second thing can happen is it can dislocate. So the bone can actually shift out of alignment to such a position that it's no longer articulating or moving properly with the bone above or below. That is called a complete dislocation. So same kind of theory we're looking at when your arm, if I can fall in such a way that I don't fall to actually break the bone, but I actually fall in such a way that my joint actually gives, and now my elbow will dislocate, called dislocation. Now, what can also happen that's going to be one step below that, something called a subluxation. Now, a subluxation is when your spine experiences a force that the bones will now subluxate. What it means is they move out of alignment. They don't totally dislocate. They don't fracture, but they're below that dislocation, but they're not normally placed anymore. But they're still articulating with the bone above and below. So it's called a subluxation. Now, that's going to affect the way the spine functions from that moment on. Now, what's interesting enough here is that when your body subluxates, this is what tends to happen. Instantaneously, your body wants to heal that injury. And when it starts healing that injury, it creates a chronic subluxation state. It creates a part of the spine that's no longer moving or working in unison with the bones above and below, and that can cause adaptive patterns to occur, not only neurologically, but also biomechanically throughout the entire spine. So let's talk about what I mean by that when we relate to something else, like your arm. Let's say I were to fall and I actually fracture my arm and it breaks out of position. Well, if it breaks to where my arm is now like this, right? It's no longer in alignment with the rest of my arm. Well, if I do nothing to this arm, my body will instantaneously start to create a healing response seconds after this injury. So there'll be swelling, the body will start healing it. In fact, if you leave it in this position long enough, your body will actually create a complete fusion of your bone in this way. Your arm will now permanently be aligned in this position. So my body healed the fracture, but it can't correct the fracture. Now that's a very distinct understanding. This is why your body can try to heal subluxation, the injury to the area, but it can't correct subluxation to restore normal function back to the area. My arm will no longer function the way it's supposed to. Wouldn't you guys agree if my arm was pointing up in this direction? everything will be altered. My way my elbow works, the way my wrist works, the way the muscles and ligaments work, even the blood vessels and nerves that go through here, they'll be altering to every single area that has to do with my arm. It could even affect my shoulder and whatnot. So when we're looking at this type of misalignment, it affects the entire function. Now let's pull this back some. My body healed this, but it couldn't correct it. In order for me to fix this, somebody had to realign it for me, put it in proper position, and then let my body heal in this position. Now, I minimize malfunction to the rest of my body. Okay? And that's happened exactly in that order. Now, if it actually healed in this area, in order for me to fix it now, I physically have to re-break it. I would have to re-break it. So this concept is very important to understand when we talk about, in the future video, how we go about correcting the spine, understanding that your body heals subluxation, but it can't correct subluxation. Two different things. I don't think that's ever been distinctive. I never had that taught to me when I was in chiropractic college, in the way the body can heal subluxation, but can't correct subluxation. Those are two different complete things. So if you look at what happens here, the body experiences a force it can no longer resist. And just to make it simple, let's say the spine shifts out of its normal position so you guys can see it, right? And it creates a subluxation pattern. Now, the subluxation pattern in the body is now creating nerve pressure, and it's also creating malfunction to this part of the body. Now, the body instantaneously, because of the force that occurred that caused the spine to shift out of alignment, didn't dislocate, so the joints are still moving and working together in some way. They didn't fracture, but it caused the subluxation, caused an injury. Now, this injury, your body instantaneously has a healing response to this injury. It's impossible to stop it. Innate will tell your body to heal the injured area, the subluxated area. So your body goes through a healing response, just like it did with the fracture. But your body cannot self-correct this. It can't get it and bring it back, because if it could have, it would have never subluxated to begin with. Remember, the force had to be greater than the spine could resist on its own. That's the only way it could subluxate. So the way subluxation occurs is that the body has to experience forces that it can't resist. The spine has to adapt to that force, and then your body has a healing response, which now can create this subluxation to become chronic over time. So unless you find subluxation that occurs instantaneously at that moment and correct it within 48 to 72 hours, almost every subluxation becomes a chronic subluxation because of the healing response that occurs. Once the healing response occurs, the subluxation patterns become instilled in the spine and now start affecting function of the entire spine. Just like if my fractured arm was broken and it was pointing upwards, it now becomes a chronic state of my arm and affects the function of every part of that arm really from that moment on until it's realigned. And the same thing happens with your spine. Now, here is the interesting part. When we go about correcting the spine, you're going to really understand how we actually can get a structural change back to the spine, and you're going to really understand why techniques fail in delivering a pre and post X-ray result, because they're not dealing with this healing response. Remember, your body's always healing. You can't stop it. It's the principle. Your body's always doing good. It's always trying to create healing. It's always trying to recover. It's always trying to restore normal function. But if it experienced that force that it can't resist, it has to adapt to it. It has to adapt to it. Now, the last thing I want to mention here is that I honestly believe subluxation today is even one step worse than that. Because I believe the way subluxation occurs today, not only do we experience forces all the time that your body can't resist, whether it be car accidents and injuries and emotional stresses, things that happen that are traumatic, but I believe the traumas that occur now are so repetitive that we are recreating subluxations almost every second in our life. You know, we look at the things that we do every single day. Like, you know, I always talk to my patients about, you know, the things that we're doing every single day to create subluxation, like constantly texting, right? Or looking at your computer in this bad position, right? Or, you know, there with your remote, or driving your car. These repetitive patterns that are constantly reinforcing this chronic subluxation position, right? So, for example, my arm was broken this way and it's stuck this way. Well, it's kind of like, imagine as opposed to trying to realign my arm, I'm just constantly trying to bend it in this wrong position. Everything I do does that. Well, that's going to be reinforcing this subluxated pattern and recreating it every single day. Now, let's say I physically happen to go somewhere and they actually realign it for me perfectly. but I don't do anything to resist the forces that are happening every single day to cause my arm to go back up in this position. You're just re-injuring yourself over and over and over and over and over again. And that's going to go really, understanding that pattern is going to be really important to understanding what it takes to really correct the spine and move a spine in a better position relative to the bones above and below, and looking at a better x-ray over time, okay? So that's how subluxation, I believe the modern theory of subluxation occurs. Again, the future videos will explain how we go about correcting it.